Alright guys, now we move on to my favorite system of all time, the Super Nintendo. Let me tell you a quick little story before we get into some of these games. Back in 1991, Super Nintendo came out in the US. Well, Super Nintendo wasn't going to go out into Canada until a few months later in early 1992. So I got it gray marketed into Canada and paid a hell of a lot of money for it. Still don't know to this day how I afforded it back then. But let me just tell you, this system is phenomenal. And one of the main reasons is Mode 7. It was doing some wicked pseudo 3D graphics that we'd never seen before. And the absolute killer sound chip in this machine. The music coming out of this cartridge was just phenomenal. And it was a home to a lot of JRPGs. This is where my love for JRPGs first blossomed. You know, I played Final Fantasy on the NES and a few other games, but that was pretty much it. The Super Nintendo was a haven for Japanese games. Now I've got, well over 140 or so Super Nintendo games. So let me just pick out a few, maybe some of the rarer ones for you guys to look at. First we got Seventh Saga from Enix. Extremely difficult RPG. We never did get the sequel, Mystic Arc, which actually I have a Time Walk reproduction cartridge of. The very first Super Nintendo game I ever played, yes, before Super Mario Land. When I bought the system, it was packaged with Super Mario World, and I bought this separately. I popped this in first, and didn't pop in anything until I finished this game. ActRaiser, still one of my favorite games of all time. Amazing soundtrack to this game. Alien 3, yes, not all movie games were bad. I know they're all bad now especially, but back then a lot of them were really good. Alien 3, in my opinion, is actually one of the best Super Nintendo games out there. Made by Probe Software, who was really odd. They're very hit and miss. They had some bad ones, they had some good ones. Alien 3 on Super Nintendo is incredible. Actually, a shooting game, now lots of shooters back then in the early 90s, that used Mode 7 to kind of scroll the background at you. It looked phenomenal for the time, and you know what? The game itself still stands up to today. Castlevania Dracula X. Okay, not as good as the TurboGrafx CD version, but you know what? If you didn't even know that game existed, this would still be a good port. Chrono Trigger. Came out very late in Super Nintendo's life. Still one of the best RPGs of all time. Can't say much more about it than that. Demon's Crest, third game in the Gargoyles Quest trilogy. Capcom, just, you know, you guys are geniuses. You were 16-bit gods back then. Square. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Final Fantasy 3, which we all know now is actually Part 6. And Final Fantasy 2, which we should all know now is Part 4. Illusion of Gaia. This is actually, I believe, second in the series. Soul Blazers Part 1, then The Legend of Gaia, then Terra Enigma. Legend of Zelda Link to the Past. Still my top 3 most favorite games of all time. Lufia 1 and 2. Here's a game that came out right at the end of the Super Nintendo's life. Nosferatu. I believe this came out in Japan years before, and it just, you know, took forever to come out in North America. It's kind of, I think, Prince of Persia, but survival horror at the same time. And Paladin's Quest from Enix. These guys just RPG after RPG after RPG on the system. And speaking of killer games, Secret of Mana. Again, still one of my favorite games of all time. It's a shame we never got the sequels. I do own a Time Walk reproduction cartridge of the sequel. And still in my top 5 Super Nintendo games of all time, Shadowrun. This is an absolutely phenomenal RPG. Not a lot of people have played this, and I think it's super rare now, but if you can hunt it down somehow, just, if you like cyberpunk, I'm a huge, Blade Runner is my favorite movie of all time. This is definitely heavily influenced by Blade Runner. Definitely very mature for its time, too. It got away with some stuff that Nintendo was pretty famous for the censorship back then, and you can do stuff in this game that, you know, Nintendo censors kind of, you know, let it slip through the cracks. And speaking, when I spoke of earlier, Soul Blazer. Again, made by Quintet, the same guys who made ActRaiser. Again, it's a bit of a Zelda clone, but, you know, killer music, killer level design, took forever. And if I remember correctly, when I finished this game back when in high school, you know, a lot of games back then still had the congratulations, you finished the game type ending. This ending went on forever, which was great. And you know what? Let's finish off the Super Nintendo collection with what's quite possibly still, I almost want to call this my favorite game of all time. I always fight between that and a couple other games. But Super Metroid, here's the deal. I don't think I've had a game give me the chills just on the title screen. But those of you who have played this know, when you turn it on and you see that music and it scrolls down, you see all the bodies lying around the laboratory and that music kicks in, it's still, you know, get it on the Virtual Console if you can't get an actual cartridge. It's definitely worth it. Still one of the best games ever made. And you know what? That's a trend on the Super Nintendo. I've been saying that with a lot of these RPGs and games. Just some of the best games of all time came out on this system. And that's because it was the 16-bit era. And Terrence and I have talked about this many, many times, about, you know, our favorite era of video games. Of course, games now look more realistic than ever. They sound better than ever. But they're not timeless. I believe the 16-bit era is timeless. For me, it's the renaissance of the video game era. What I mean by that is, like, everything was so hand-drawn. And you know what? Polygons get old. We'll always be able to, you know, the next Battlefield's going to look better. The next Call of Duty's going to look better. The next Gears of War is going to look better. But hand-drawn art will always look great, no matter what. And that's one thing that definitely helped propel the Super Nintendo, was this Japanese art and the sound from Sony. Just a phenomenal system. I can't stop talking about it enough. It's quite honestly, it's my favorite system of all time. And still to this day, listen, I have a modern game set up with, you know, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 and all that. I still jump back into the game room and turn on the Super Nintendo and just reminisce about how good games were back then in the 90s.
Don't stop rocking the beat.